Writing from the soul is the mother of all invention, and 21 Grams is back for another season of this exploration. We will look into the artist and the art they create. Except, this season we're adding the questionnaire, invented by the great Bernard Pivot, to go even deeper. They say 21 grams is the weight of the soul, and this show is the scale. So now here's your host for 21 grams, Joe Compton. Hello everybody, welcome to 21 grams. Look who I have with me. It's the awesome Allegra Pescatore. Hi Allegra, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm delighted to be here.
So I always like to start the show by offering my guest an opportunity to tell everybody a little bit about themselves. So please feel free. The floor is yours for the moment.
All right. Well, I am a disabled author originally from Italy. I write a whole wide variety of science fiction and fantasy and everything in between, along with a whole bunch of other authors in a collective publishing experiment. Let's just say. I'm also an artist. I'm a cover designer, an interior illustrator, and I do a whole bunch of other things on the side because there is no such thing as one true hobby.
I love that. That's awesome. Yeah, we'll get into the collective aspect of things, but the chat really, well, author J.P. Bernson really wanted you to be here.
He is one of my co-authors and a notorious troll. We love him for his trollish ways.
Bringing us the plot mom, ruler of the world, overseer of new authors, all hail the plot mom. Down with the usurper plot troll. Plot troll shall never fail.
This is a long-standing experiment. I had to take a few weeks of leave from my Discord server. JP got put in charge, and instead of just saying Allegra's on leave for a few weeks, I'm in charge, he as the plot troll versus me as the plot mom staged a coup and demanded allegiance.
That's funny. Lenny O'Connor, A.F. Stewart, and then you're breaking the fourth wall for us tonight. All right. Yeah. Troll in the chat. We love our troll. We aren't an experiment. Okay. All right. I've ripped through that. The troll can keep going as long as they want. That's fine. All right. So, I kind of wanted to start our conversation off by asking you about this collective that you've kind of created and this idea. Where did the idea come from to begin with, and how has the experiment gone for you? I know it's now fully out of the laboratory and out onto the page, but tell us a little bit about how this all began.
Sure. So my introduction to storytelling was, first of all, I was very young, but also it was collaborative from the get-go. I had a neighbor down the street in Italy who we both had sets of Playmobil figurines. We were like 6 to 7 years old, and we would come up with characters for each of them. And every day we would get together and we would play out a story with these characters. And then the next day we would shuffle around where these characters were in society, what world they lived in, whether it was science fiction or fantasy or pirates, and we tell a different story with the same characters. And all through my young childhood, we were doing that, and it was always collaborative. We were always riffing off each other and improvising. And then I got my first computer at 13. And I discovered fan fiction, which, I mean, every 13-year-old, I feel, discovers fan fiction at some point if they're nerdy. But mostly, I discovered role-play forums. There is a whole thriving community of people in fandom who want to RP in the worlds that authors create, but tell their own stories.
Right.
And it's where I actually taught myself to read and write English. I was illiterate until I was a teenager because I went to school in Italy and I just spoke Italian and read and wrote Italian. I spoke English, but so I started writing on these forums, and bless the writers I wrote against, because I was spelling atrociously. I had Italian grammar. Everything was phonetic. I don't even know how they understood what I was saying. But there was this back and forth and this synergy that happened when you were writing with people. The stories would go in unexpected directions. I'd be up at like 3 a.m. with my blankets over me and my computer with my laptop overheating on my pillow, typing furiously. And it just clicked one day when I was about 14 or 15. I said, I don't like writing alone. When I'm sitting down to write my novel, which I was always writing novels because I love writing, I don't get the same synergistic vigor of writing with other people. And at the same time, I was kind of analyzing fan spaces for the first time ever. And I looked at fan fiction and I said, there is something magical about the way that authors riff off each other. How someone will take a character who's just a mention in the canon and give them a whole backstory and give them depth and history that just was never there to begin with. And it sucked that you couldn't make money doing that it couldn't become part of the canon.
Right.
I said, well, what if it can? What if I create a sandbox of multiple worlds in multiple genres with a whole spattering of cool characters and history, and I invite other authors to come play in the sandbox, and when they write something cool, say, yes, that's canon. Yes, that's part of the world now. And then I can riff off that and they can riff off me. And it started out with just a couple people who fortunately didn't think that this idea was absolutely crazy. And mostly we've found people who want to write with us from RP forums, from situations where people were used to writing, back and forth with each other. And it's turned into a community now of about 12 people and growing. It's growing every year by a person or two. And it's been absolutely magical what we have created that is so far beyond anything that I could have idealized, envisioned on my own.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the structure of it and how it comes together, because it's very fascinating, the idea of playing off of each other. But at some point there has to be, well, first there had to be a starting point, which obviously, you created, but, putting that into motion, there has to be a plan for an end game, a middle game, a groundwork. So how much of that is designed? How much of it is on the fly? Where does that all come from?
Well, the way I can best describe it is we know where we're going. There's a meta plot, and that's been in place pretty much since the beginning. So we know the end of all of this. But how we get there and who the big players are at the end is more nebulous. And it becomes less and less nebulous with every book that's published. We know that the main key players of each series are going to probably have a role in the meta plot if they don't, for some reason stop. They die, they, have their happily ever after and never want to be seen again. They disappear off into the wilderness. But for the most part, once a series is published, that becomes the established canon. We run everything very much like a co-op. People don't have more power than others, even though I designed this and I have more voting rights just because I put out a larger body of work. Mm-hmm. The goal is that every person who comes in here gets what they put in and gets a say in the direction we take this narratively, as a business, as a model. But the only thing that I have that no one else has is I'm the canon checker. I make sure that what gets published is true to what has been published before and what's in the works to be published soon. And I can send things back to be like, hey, this doesn't work with the established things that we have agreed are going to happen. Can you make an adjustment here or there? So logistically, we do have various systems before it gets to that point. And then I'm the final say of, yes, this actually fits with where we're going. Let's move forward.
She is the keeper of the sacred timeline.
Yes, indeed.
And I saw Vanessa jumped in here. Hi, Vanessa. Nice to see you. So what about opening it up to other authors? Is genre decided for? Is I mean, they obviously will pick a character or create a character that would fall into this world and to take care of it. But are you trying to stay to one specific genre? Are you allowing them to kind of branch away, kind of subgenre it? What is the plan as far as the genre
A
and that
little bit of both. Every world, so it's a multiverse. There are
Mm-hmm.
10 worlds, and every world has a overarching genre.
Mm-hmm.
The world of my main series, Dracona, is gas lamp fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
However, as with everything, gas lamp fantasy mystery, cozy gas lamp fantasy, sword and sorcery. If
Right.
people are wanting to write in that world, they aren't limited to the dark and political gas lamp fantasy that I'm writing. I have one of our newest authors is working on a whole series about the labor movement 50 years before my story starts, and it's all about societal growth and transformation, and very it's the same, but it also has a very different feel. It's about the common people working on the ground, where I'm dealing with royalty and big nationwide wars. And in that same world, I have this idea for a spin-off story that's just Black Stallion, but with a dragon and a little girl stranded on an island, and they have to learn to fly together. So, we have overarching genres, but underneath that, there's a lot of freedom.
Yeah, I mean, you've been at this a while, so you understand this probably more than most. But this is a conversation that I've been having a lot on this show in particular, and that is that it's not so taboo anymore. It's not so much more about losing audience members to sticking to genre anymore. You can blend genres. You can go outside of the box and be okay. Once you make that step out of your comfort zone and you go into a different comfort zone, you're finding that your audience will follow you. Is that kind of how you're feeling right about now?
Yes and no. There are people who bounce right off of Project AO. They're just like,
Mm-hmm.
no, I want my fantasy to be fantasy and my sci-fi to be sci-fi. And the reality is that we're not writing for that reader. Every reader is going to find their niche. And I knew from the very beginning that we had to be able to hop genres to be able to tell the story we wanted to tell. We're trying to tell a story about the hubris of gods, about colonialism, about these big societal issues, and we wanted to explore them through all these different lenses of all these different genres. If I made a promise at the beginning of my first book that this was only going to ever be fantasy, I was going to break that promise.
Yeah.
So while it's not, obvious in Where Shadows Lie, by the third book in the series, our dragons are right there next to spaceships. It is very much science fantasy. And I think that the readers who love playfulness in genre, who love to see this weird amalgamation take shape, who want to read one book and then read the other book and try to figure out how are they going to come together? How do these fit? Those are our readers.
Which there's a vast amount of out there. I mean,
there are plenty. I mean, think of every person who both reads and watches sci-fi and fantasy and mystery and thrillers. There are people who enjoy a lot of different genres, and why not be playful? I mean, there's so much out there.
Even if you look at the MCU, there's comedy acts, there's comedy films, there's comedy comics, there is serious stuff, there's world building stuff, there's all kinds of different things.
The MCU is the model we are trying to achieve. Each series has its own flavor, its own cast, its own storyline, but they are part of a bigger whole. In fact, we have a book which we literally call Avengers Assemble, which is basically what is going to kick off the meta plot years and years and years from now. But every time we actually refer to it as Avengers Assemble because it is the closest analogy that we can find.
Genre hopping is fun. Playing with things is fun. Nerds are gonna nerd. Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I was gonna say the world building in this process has got to be exciting and interesting and a lot. I have to imagine some of those conversations are just those kind of those kind of spitballing and kind of, trying to figure things out, those have got to be some fun. I'm curious though, from you, what is the biggest surprise you've had in doing this?
That's a hard one. I mean, the simple thing is just I keep being surprised by what we come up with. Like the twists and turns that I never could have expected. It's like I get to be the reader and the writer.
Yeah, right.
I don't know what's coming up next because I'm not in charge. I'm in charge of a tiny little segment of it. So there's this excitement there. But I think the thing that really surprised me was how much letting go of control over the project made it so much better. Like, I am a type A personality. I am a manager in my, day jobs. I run things with like spreadsheets and everything. And I do a bit of that here logistically. But I had to step back and say, I need to let go of control of this, or I become the vice that restrains it and keeps it from being everything it could be.
Sure.
And the moment I did that and I said, hey, come in, just come in with everything you've got. There are worlds that are so beyond anything I could have dreamed of. And I've seen also authors bloom in ways that when I met them, I was like, there's no way this person is, oh yes, they did it.
I mean, other than writing within the world, what are one of the qualifications you're looking for if people wanted to get involved in the AO Collective?
So what we're looking for is people who have already read our books and like them, that they find the worlds fascinating and something that they want to write in. Beyond that, we usually request a writing sample, and we want to see that it is something good and that fits with our style and our genre. And finally, it's a big, huge plus if they publish before, because we know that they understand the process of getting a book out. But the reality is that not every AO author eventually is going to be one of these like core people who do everything together. There may be someone who just writes fan fiction of one of our books and we read it and we say, hey, this is great. Let's make it canon. Do you want money? And, that person writes one thing and then disappears off into the sunset. Like I very much want it to be an organic sandbox where people can put in as little or as much as they want.
Are you planning any kind of anthology work within this, or is that just going way beyond the scope of anything anybody can handle?
There will probably be anthologies of short stories published as Project AO compilations at some point. We're not there yet, mostly because most of our authors are working on novel-length projects.
Sure.
And are passionately working on novel-length projects. And if I try to tell them, hey, can you write me a short story by like March? They'll just look at me and be like, no, I'll write you a novel by March. Go away. You're wasting my time.
So once a series start to finish up and kind of get into the collective starts to kind of take a little bit more of a shape, that's probably something you guys would think about in the future. Yeah. How about novellas? Are you allowing for people to write off of the characters and do a little novella of that?
Yes, I have a few of them. We have classifications of characters. We have characters who are proprietary, meaning only one author gets to write them. And if they want to appear in someone else's books, they have to invite that author in to write their lines of dialogue. Then we have characters who are just like, check in, please. Basically, you can write them, but have the original author check them for consistency and to make sure that it doesn't like go against things. And finally, we have characters who are free for all. Anyone can write them. And a lot of those are characters that the original author put in, but they don't have a fleshed out backstory. And they're basically up for adoption. If someone is inspired by that character and says, hey, yeah, actually, this is great. I have a great idea for where this character could go. They can become their proprietary character. Or until then, they can be written by anyone.
As someone who you've already mentioned that you did collaboration gets your fuel fired a little bit, but you've done it before the AO Collective. What did you learn from that experience that you've taken into the AO Collective?
As far as collaborative writing or solo
Hmm.
writing?
Yeah, as far as
Um,
collaborative writing goes.
well, mostly it's my RP background, and I think we collaborate in Project AO differently than most people collaborate. I've talked to a lot of other co-author duos,
Hmm.
and it's often like one person writes one chapter, and then the other person writes the other chapter, and then they check each other's work. We write like role players on forums. We go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, maybe every couple of lines, maybe every couple of paragraphs. We're usually in the same document on a voice chat in Discord, giggling hysterically. And while my co-author is writing his paragraph, I'll be right behind editing what he's writing and fixing things. And occasionally we'll just be like ping-ponging back between like 3 or 4 people in the same scene. It's delightful chaos. And it all comes from that RP background, that forum-based,
Yeah, it's like
text-based
those old school
RP.
message boards from back in the
Exactly.
day. Yeah, it's fascinating, but do you feel like if you've collaborated before, though, even if you haven't done it in this style, that's going to give you a leg up
Yes.
in being a part of this group?
You have to learn not to control everything, and you have to learn to basically play, yes and no but
Yeah.
at every turn. There's a level of playfulness that it almost feels like a switch you turn on. Like, this is play. This isn't work. And yes, it's still hard work to write a novel. But the chapters I know are the best are the ones where those collaborative juices are just going, and it doesn't feel like you're two separate people arguing over every word. It feels like you're two artists with paint on a giant canvas making abstract art where there is no thing you can do that's wrong. You're just playing with each other, like with the idea and with each other's brushstrokes. And when you allow yourself to get into that mentality where it's just you are working towards the same goal and you're having fun doing it, it works.
Is there something to be said for the idea that where having created this now you're in a much better place as a writer than you would have been if you had started this a little bit earlier? Like, this is like the right place at the right time kind of idea that you've been through the rigors and you've published a lot, right? And so words have come out and you've put them out there. Do you feel like that has given you an advantage to kind of start this and put this, get it to a point where it starts rolling really fast?
I knew that I'm one of those people who, I grew up with 2 artists as parents, and I watched the process of practice. You practice and you practice and you practice, and you do anatomy studies every day. And so I very much set out to let me write my first million words before I even think about publishing. And so I wrote 1,000,000 words. I wrote the same book a few times. I wrote a couple throwaway books. I wrote and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. And then I needed to learn how to publish. I already had the idea in mind. I've already had the world since I was like 13 or 14. I've had waves of people in Project AO. I had a group in high school who were helping me world build. And then I had a group in college who were helping me world build, but they didn't stick. And I think part of the reason, well, a couple of them have, but I think the part of the reason was I didn't have the ability to lead from the front because I didn't know what I was doing. And there's a reason why my first series that I published is a solo venture and not one of my co-authored pieces, because I felt like I did need to learn, how do I get a book out? How do I get it formatted? How do I get it edited? How do I get it, how do I get a cover on there? I learned how to make covers.
How to finish a series.
Yes. And I needed to understand the structure of storytelling so that I could help figure out why something wasn't working down the line. We have these massive stories with so many moving parts, with so many people involved in all the moving parts, that someone needed to understand plot very deeply. It's why I got the moniker Plot Mom, because I like story structure fascinates me. So I needed to grab all that before, yes, I could start helping others get there too.
Vanessa says online role playing is how I got good at dialogue and action. So, and then JP says, I like how she says he can, you can just go, you can just say, you edit my work behind me. But so how do you handle research aspects of things? Does somebody go into the message board and goes, I need some help finding out stuff like about this? Or do you leave that, do people just leave that on their own volition? How do you handle the research? Because you're dealing with deep fantasy troping and a lot of worlds that need building, and they have political, they have just mechanical things that I'm sure have to be talked about and put out there, at least talked about, maybe not written in the final word, but at least have an understanding of them, right?
So. Stage 1 is let's get a core concept going. Stage 2 is you give the work to the people who are passionate about it. I'm not going to go off and like deeply study like horror tropes. But Jay Dorden, who's our resident horror writer, if I need a horror trope, if I'm like, hey, I need a terrifying monster, what do you got? Like, give me your best shot. Like, she will absolutely come through with either the big scary monster or a resource to get the big scary monster. So there's the first line of defense, which is just who is in our group who has a passion for this thing, who may already know the answer. And if we cannot find that person, then it's up to the writers of the actual book or series or world to go out and get the information that they need. Every world has leads. And so there's 2 to 3 people on most of the planets that are like the lore keepers and the ones who are responsible for taking all the little bits, creating the world building that other people are going to use, and conveying that world building to the group and all the people who are writing in it.
Jay Dorden says the rabbit holes a researcher insane, and then they bow and she pulls out her Mary Poppins bag of scary. My Poppins bag of scary. Nice. Yeah. So what are you working on within this collective that you're excited about right now?
Well, I've been banging my head against the second arc of the Last Gift series for about a year now. I think I've restarted it from scratch about 4 times. And part of that is because I have been telling and retelling the first 3 books since I was 8. And now suddenly I get to write all the stuff I'm excited about, and there's too much. So the process has been whittling down the story I want to tell into something that actually fits a narrative. But it's themes that are really close to my heart. Like I always look at that series as the deep work. Like it's the stuff where I'm pushing myself beyond my comfort zone. I'm dealing with intense topics about disability, about my own journey of acceptance and internalized ableism. So it's hard work, but very meaningful and very rewarding when I do it. And then there's the Mountain Fell series, which is where I go to just have a fun time. It's our flagship series. All the writers in AO are writing in the Mountain Fell. So we have a high density of cool stories going on with seasons spanning 10 books. And I have 2 characters in there, and both of them are just... they're easy to write for me because they're comfort characters. I can write them forever. I'm always giggling. Both, like, one of them has very physical humor. Like, she's just kind of extra. And I get to just be a little larger than life when I write her. And the other one is a cinnamon roll with the power to level, armies. And I can't help but just enjoy writing him because of the sheer destructive force that he is. So that's probably the series that I'm most excited about, just because it's like my candy bar series. Every time I write it, I leave with a big smile on my face and grinning from ear to ear about the soap opera drama that we're putting these people through.
Something about collaboration that I think is paramount and important, and it's something that I had to learn in film a lot, is that you have to not only find the right people to fill the right roles and do the right thing, but you have to have immense trust in one another. Have you found that has become a huge characteristic? You'll know that somebody's going to stick because there's a trust factor that you've developed with those folks.
Yes. And really, I mean, part of it is just I've been incredibly lucky.
Yeah.
We just came back 2 weeks ago from a week-long retreat where people came from all over the United States, from Canada, from all over, just to spend a week doing nothing but this. There's a level of commitment from every single author that's currently in, which is just mind-blowing. I burst into tears a couple times because it was so moving to have this many people gathered together on something that was my little 8-year-old self's crazy idea. But there's also just, yes, it is trust. And I think the trust actually comes out in the writing itself, in the late nights where you see the other person is just as committed to what you're doing as you are, that they're struggling through the same scene right alongside you. Like, because we're all our writing together, we are in the trenches together. There isn't a moment where one person is, doing it all and the other person is coasting. Like, it is very much a united front. And by the end of the book, like, that person can write in your voice and you can write in theirs. And it's like you become this amalgamation of this third author that isn't you and isn't them, but is the two of you together. And that creates, I think, a lifelong bond.
Is this going to be your home for as long as you want to make it, Allegra, or do you feel like there's still some unfinished business outside of this that you're going to tackle at some point?
I have 1 or 2 projects outside of Project AO, and really it boils down to the other love of my life, which is food. And I keep coming up with stories about our relationship with food. Specifically, my degree was in fusion cuisine and its role in cross-cultural conflict negotiation. I'm really
a diploma.
Yep. But there's something about the emotionality that comes from bringing people together around food, and how it can go right to the heart of you, that it supersedes language, that it supersedes culture, that it supersedes everything while still being intricately connected to all of that. It's one of the few things that every single human has a connection with. I mean, we all are born and we all die and we all eat. And so I think there will be books about food somewhere outside of AO.
Nonfiction or fiction?
Fiction. I want to, like, I'm fascinated by food and disaster, by food and border, by food and conflict. And right. I think that there's something to be said there.
I mean, yes, there are plenty of Thanksgiving dinner tables that would agree with you on that respect.
Yes.
It's funny you say that, because thinking, as you were saying, I was thinking about my experiences at cons, especially, and the greatest moments, the greatest conversations you end up having are at the table when you're eating. And
always.
And you're having deep-rooted conversation, and it's usually shop talk, but sometimes it goes beyond that. But for the most part, it is stuff that is paramount to why you exist and what you're doing, So I can totally see that, Anita says you should watch Tasting History.
I watch Tasting History all the time. I am actually part of the SCA, which is a historical reenactment society, and I really am very passionate about historical food. I've always just, like, I collect salt. I know so much about the history of salt and like its incredibly important role in international politics, and the sheer volume of history entirely defined by this just little chemical that we really like to eat, and it's very necessary for food preservation, is astonishing, and I am way too much of a nerd about it.
Taste as well. It's
Yeah.
necessary for taste and changes something. The
An
composition
industry, and it's probably one of my top fascinations, which is why I wrote NaCl, which is salt. What happens if there's a world where there is no salt or very little salt? What are the ramifications of that?
So you did a reverse Dune, basically.
Yes, actually. Dune is one of my favorite all-time books. I love resource scarcity as a trope. And I also suffer from a condition called POTS, which means that I have to be on a high salt diet or I pass out. There's also a condition called hypernatremia, which a lot of athletes and people suffer from, which is basically when you don't have enough salt in your body. And you can die of it. I mean, it is absolutely horrifying. First, you just lose energy, and then you start passing out, and then you have seizures, and then you die. And so when E. Sands and I sat down, I proposed this world that didn't have salt except in one place. And what if that place were controlled by a business entity? How would a world like that look? We wanted to talk about, drug scarcity. We wanted to talk about, a business controlling vital things that people needed to live. It's a very political book, but it's also very much driven by my own passion for salt and my own experience of what it feels like to be without salt when your body desperately needs it.
I was thinking the same thing, Vanessa. Vanessa said books about food. Definitely the Italian in her speaking. Yeah, go figure. An Italian has a fascination with food.
I know. Who would have ever guessed?
That's not tropey or anything. Yeah, I'm curious. What, in your humble opinion, was the greatest era of food then?
Oh, I don't think that there's ever been a greatest era of food, because the food that I think is the greatest is the comfort food that moms make kids when they're sick. When you look at death row inmates, most of them want for their last meal something that is comfort. When you look at people who are stressed and tired and heartsore and homesick, what they want is the food of their childhood. Simple things with just a few ingredients drawn from local custom and, and the smells and the taste of home. And that is the food that fascinates me from all over the world. I mean, you have your congee, your tom yum and tomkas soup, your mac and cheese, those foods to me are where the magic is, not what's being served at high-end restaurants.
I love that. Have you ever considered publishing in Italian?
No, and for one very big reason, I left Italy when I was 13, so I have a 13-year-old's vocabulary in Italian.
Okay, fair enough.
I could probably write a children's book in Italian, but I don't think I could ever translate my more adult work.
Do you have any inkling of putting some of your own heritage into some of the, especially with the food aspect of it? Are you thinking about some of those experiences maybe will leak into your fiction at some point, especially around the food ones?
Some of it. I mean, and definitely the first of the books about food, I'm probably going to be co-authoring with Lini O'Connor, who's also Italian-born, currently living in America, who writes in Project AO, and is also a huge foodie and a historian. And we are planning a book that's set in Florence during the Black Death, during the plague. And we really want to, again, food and disaster. I'm fascinated by those two things coming together.
Yeah, they mentioned that they'll change the idea of friends,
Forza, which is
Forza.
basically go, power.
Go. Yeah. That's awesome. I'm curious how much, because as authors, we do draw upon a lot of our own personal experience. We draw a lot on things that we love. Are you very careful within the collective about homages, and are also how close to things that we would know are you looking at in terms of the AO? I mean, obviously, you want to let people write what they're going to write and what they know, but is there kind of a monitoring of troping and homages and those ideas?
We want to make sure that nothing is derivative and nothing could get us in legal trouble or anything like that.
Well, yeah.
Most of the novels start as a pitch to me. Basically,
Mhm.
hey, I have an idea. I would like to use these characters. I would like to do this kind of story, which is then followed by, I usually ask them to create an outline or a plot map, and I help them do that, and I help them ideate until we have a story that I think fits in the collective, doesn't tread on anyone's toes on work in progress, and is not, entirely derivative of something else. However, I'm not picky about tropes. I don't think trope is a bad word. In fact, I think it's just the Lego building blocks of the writing world.
Sure.
And limiting which Legos people can use is not so much fun.
Especially when you're collectively doing it, right?
Exactly. So, you don't want half the Legos in a bin where you can see them but you can't use them. Like that's
right. Yeah. or not let somebody go into that bin who's watching the other things being constructed, right?
So, exactly.
I have to imagine that when you're reading some of these stories as a fan, as a reader, and as an editor and part of the collective, that you're thinking about how cool the cover will be. Is that fair to say?
Often I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do for a cover, if I'm the right person to do the cover. NACL, I didn't, because I knew that there was a specific cover designer that I really wanted for the cover. But yes, I'm often thinking about what is the scene, what are the characters, how can I bring it to life.
I'm interested in that approach for the AO, in the idea that you're writing series within series within series, 10 different multiverses. Are you looking at a branding aspect for that? Is there going to be a requirement that covers it once a cover is established within that world or that multiverse, that it has to kind of mirror what that cover was?
There are fonts and general design language that stay book to book, even series to series.
Mm-hmm.
There will be a massive rebranding of Project AO over the next year or two. Now that there's enough books out, and we're planning we're planning a Kickstarter sometime next year, and we're hoping that by the end of the next couple of years, every book will have the world symbol of their world on the spine in the same place, and you'll be able to line all the Project AO books up together, and you will be able to divide them up by world and by series, and it will be very cohesive.
How are you handling rights as far as things go within the AO collective?
So the actual we have a fairly in-depth contract, which basically boils down to the world building you do belongs to Project AO. The books you write belong to you, and the characters that you decree as public property are public property. And there's also a basically requirement that if you stop writing, that you have to negotiate whether the characters that you have written become public property, or if you want them to be, sent off into retirement or killed off or given to someone else. But as far as like the actual logistical, like nickels and dimes, we really want our authors to make a living.
Yeah.
Currently, we sit down once a year and vote on how we split up royalties. And every year we decide how much are we giving to Project AO out of every sale, and what happens with that money. First of all, Project AO doesn't make a dime until all expenses of each book is paid off.
Sure.
So all the editing expenses, all the covering expenses, if the authors are paying that, they get to make money until all of that is paid off. Then, again, as a group, we decide what to do. If we have extra money, we tend to either reinvest it as a group or disperse it based on the number of books everyone has written and a few other things. But that model is set to change as the group grows, people's needs change. And I really tried to build something where I was not dictating what happened financially. I don't have any more votes than anyone else because I'm me.
Right.
I have more votes because I publish more books, but that will change eventually. And I really hope that it really does function not as a, traditional publishing house, but as a co-op.
So playing devil's advocate here, is there contingencies for like a producer comes and approaches anybody and wants to create their series into something that is on a screen?
Like everything, it has to be voted on by the entire project.
Even though you're the owner of that said book that they
you are the rights holder as far as royalties are concerned.
Mm-hmm.
As far as like you can make changes to the text, you can make changes to the covers, you can decide to produce an audiobook yourself, but any contracts for outside distribution have to go through Project AO as a whole.
Much screaming will probably ensue. Discord might break. I would hope that screaming of joy.
Yes. Well, part of the reason I love this model is all it takes is one of us to make it big, and we all suddenly get a chance.
Sure. Yeah. It's the same. It's very similar to an anthology in a lot of respects in that aspect, because you have your anchors in anthologies that are established authors who are going to put their presence out there already, right? And so what you're doing is really establishing within the collective, but you're going to eventually have anchors, probably the first 4 or 5 people who have published within this world, who are, they're probably going to end up being your anchors at that point.
Absolutely.
And that makes a lot of sense. That's, so going to the design aspect of things, I wanted to kind of finish up our conversation talking a little bit about what, the big monkey in the room, which is AI, and what your thoughts are on as a working cover artist, what you think of it. Are you employing it to help you at all? Is that something that you're looking at? Or
I'm not using it, but what I am using it for is I use it a lot to like practice my own skills. I'll have AI, draw something, and I'll be like, okay, can I draw this? Can I recreate this with my hands? But it's all iteration. It's the same reason I do anatomy studies. It's the same reason I go out and I paint things outside. I want as much experience as I can in as many different things, and AI is going to look different than anything out in the world. So there's occasionally I'll dip my toe into it. I've been very careful not to pay anyone who's developing AI because I don't want it going out there. But, I'm interested in it because it's kind of like Pandora's box. It's been opened, and we're going to have to learn to live with it in some way, shape, or form. But if I don't make my own art, I pay other artists for theirs. And I'm always going to encourage authors to continue paying your artists, because the reality is that AI doesn't understand the genre requirements, doesn't understand the human element, doesn't get emotion the way a human artist can put in emotion. And the other reality is that authors very rarely know what they want on their cover and know what will actually sell. And a huge part of a cover designer's job is interpreting what an author tells you into something that is actionable and like will sell. So while I think that AI is an interesting tool, and I'm looking forward to a day when it is done ethically and trained off of artists who consent and get well compensated for their consent. And I think that we will one day get services that do that. Until that day comes, it's unfortunately a Pandora's box that's been opened.
Mm-hmm. Has the collective had conversations about AI?
We've had some, it's again, it's a fun tool. If you're trying to describe something and you're having trouble with words, being able to generate an image of it and then describe the image can be a useful tool. Sometimes I will do that just because I really am having a hard time picturing something in my head. But as a whole, we, the collective will not be using AI products or, tools that employ generative, sections. Like obviously Grammarly employs some AI, and that's a little different. But we're not going to be generating any text or images for anything, or at least not knowingly using anything. It's hard on stock sites now because sometimes there's AI stuff hidden right among the not AI stuff.
Yeah, I am a partner of Deviant Art. We're partners, and part of the thing that I have to scroll through is a lot of AI art out there. That's a lot of artists are posting a lot of AI art on Deviant Art, and it's kind of weeding through that a little bit for me. Because part of my agreement with Deviant Art is to make sure that the artists get credit for what they're doing, and so, if it's an actual artist, I want to make sure that artist does get credit for what they're doing. So it's a difficult
topic right now. It's not as easy as it should all go away, because the reality is it won't.
No. And if we don't learn to incorporate it and integrate it into what we do and use it for good, it's going to only get worse and become cancer or evil that
at the same time, it is our responsibility to keep the creators afloat until we can get there, because it takes so little to have a cover artist fail their business and get a job, and they get a job and now they don't have time for cover art, and suddenly an artist has been lost to the corporate world. That to me is the tragedy of the growing pains of AI. It's the people who can't put food on their table anymore through the thing that they are talented at and have worked their butts off for.
It's the voice actor's nightmare right now. I mean, the voice actors, I mean, that's where most of these companies are putting their focus on, is the audiobook, because audiobooks are so expensive.
The day that they announced that they had AI audiobooks coming out, I contacted my voice narrator and I said, here's $10,000, make me books. Because I was so incensed. I have this narrator, Marianne, who is, she is the most talented woman I've ever had the pleasure of working with. She brings my books to life in a way I never could have imagined. And all I could think of is there is just no replacing that.
No. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't understand inflection. Luckily, it doesn't understand those things, because if it did, that would be
trouble. It doesn't understand emotion. It doesn't understand when your voice should waver, when there should be a hint of tears, when there's laughter boiling over through a sentence. No machine is ever going to be able to capture that human element.
All right. My last question before we get to the questionnaire for you is, I'm curious, in your mind's eye, and again, in your humble opinion, what makes a good cover?
Makes you question makes you curious about what's inside. It's not a specific design language. It's just something that makes you curious.
Does genre matter for covers?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the core foundation remains the same. It should catch the eye and make you want to learn more.
I love that. Awesome. All right, you ready to do the questionnaire?
I'm ready. Hit me up.
All right, so we're about to do la questionnaire, invented by the great Bernard Pivot and perfected by the awesome James Lipton inside the actor studio, and stolen for my purposes to torture my guests. I mean, to learn more about my guests. And
you can say torture. We know what you're about here.
So, Allegra, what is your favorite word to write?
To write. Oh, I don't think I have a favorite word to write, but I know what my favorite word is, which is the Italian word.
Okay.
And it's riso, which means both rice and laughter.
Nice. What is your least favorite word to write? I know you got to have one of those.
Anything with T's, G's, and H's bundled together. As someone who taught herself to read English through all those nasty, horrible words with those horrible H's, G's, and T's, are just.
That's awesome. So, what turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
I think it's genuine connection and genuine emotion. Like I really hate bullshit. I really hate artificiality and like following rules for the sake of rules. I want the deep stuff. I want the punches straight to the feels.
Well, you might have just answered the next question, but what is it that turns you off?
If something feels formulaic and like the goal of the person creating was to get it out the door as fast as possible and put as least amount of effort possible, I find it boring. Like, this has value. Someone's going to love it. But for me personally, if I can look at the first page of a book and know the ending, I know the ending and I don't want to read the book.
All right, everybody, I'm about to do this to the plot mom. What is your favorite curse word?
Fuck.
Simple.
It can be used everywhere.
Nice.
It's every way. It is the most versatile word. There are 555 F-bombs in NaCl Eye of the Storm, and like 7 of them are in the first line.
Nice. All right. So what sound or noise do you love?
I love the sound when your hand is like trailing through legumes or rice. That like swishing, really gentle noise. I love it.
What sound or noise do you dislike?
Ice grinding on ice.
Okay.
I hate winter.
Okay. Fair enough. What character of yours would put their face on the currency of their world?
Who? Are they making the choice to put their face on the currency of their world?
Yeah.
Okay. So that would be, his name is Moss. He is the villain of the Mountain Fell series, and he 100% would love to see himself on some currency.
Nice. What artistry would you love to try that you haven't yet?
Oh, I've dabbled in a lot of things.
Well, dabbling's okay. If there's one you would love to be able to pursue, if you've dabbled in it, that's fine.
I think 3D sculpting. My father is a sculptor, and I just don't have the strength to pound marble, or the tactile. Like, I have an issue with clay. I just don't like touching it very much. But I really do want to understand 3D shape better than I do, and I would love to really, really grasp it in a way that I don't right now.
What artistry would you never try, no matter what?
Marble carving. I lived in a marble carving community. I know exactly how much it hurts.
Yeah, there is some deep calluses and wounds with that stuff for sure. So it's crazy. All right. So if heaven exists, or any sort of beyond that you believe in exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive?
A knock-knock joke.
Well, I don't have a knock-knock joke for you right now, Allegra, but I will say that this was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show, doing this with me, talking about this incredible adventure you're on, because it is incredible. What you're doing is amazing and fascinating. And I could not think of a better person to take it on either. I've known you for a little bit now, and to hear that this was the direction you were going, it just seemed like that was like it was like a perfect, like when you find that perfect corner in the jigsaw puzzle after searching for it for a long time, you're that perfect corner. So I think it fits you perfectly. And congratulations on all your success and everything you're doing. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you,
Tell
Joe.
tell everybody where they can find out more information about the collective and more about your stuff as well.
Sure. You can find more information about the AO Collective at aocollectivepublishing.com. You can find me at Author Allegra everywhere on the internet, pretty much. And if you really want to get involved, get to know us and everything we're doing, I run a Discord server called Plot Mom, where we have a ton of fun. We have a bunch of write-ins. We have a weekly tea time, and we would love to have you.
Nice. So we'll be back on Sunday, everybody, with This Week in Indies and all the things that we're doing. We've got a lot of shows going on here at Go Indie Now, so we really appreciate you joining us. Please do subscribe if you haven't before. We'd love to have you hang around and see what else we're doing, and hit that like button and leave us a comment and let us know how you enjoyed this interview, which I'm sure you did, because it was an awesome interview to enjoy. So, and with that being said, remember that it's always time to go indie now, and we'll see you next time. Bye.